Cheers, Rockets fans. Welcome to The Locker Line, an exclusive podcast from the home of the Rockets.
Whoa!
Sports Talk 790.
Rockets!
The Locker Line is proudly served to you by Carbox Clutch City Lager.
It is good!
Oh, yeah? Red Nation, get ready. Get ready. The Locker Line starts now.
Welcome aboard.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Happy New Year, and thanks for spending another part of your holiday with us here at the Lager Line, served to you as always, courtesy of Clutch City Lager of Karbach Brewing. I'm your host, Ben Dubose, editor of USA Today's Rockets Wire and contributor to Sports Talk 790, the official flagship radio station of your Houston Rockets. Today, I'm joined by our co-host and producer, Paulo Alves, out of Portugal. Paulo, how's it going? You ready for 2023?
Yes, it's I'll call it the year of Wemby. I'm ready.
The year of Wemby for the Rockets, right?
Yeah, we get Wemby, everything's solved, and we're winning a championship in 3-4 years.
Yeah, could not agree more with that. There's so much potential. Of course, the Wemby scenario, even if you're the worst team, it's only like 14%. So you don't want to hang your hat on it. Yet it's a 14% shot of your franchise being a juggernaut. So at the same time, it's hard not to at least think about that possibility. The good news, though, is that the 2023 draft is really, really strong. So even if it's not Wemby, you're going to get a real difference maker in a few months that can join Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. to form a core for the next generation of Rockets basketball. There's also a veteran that could come in and potentially lead that core in the form of James Harden. And when we recorded a week ago, we did a show based on Tim McMahon's podcast comments about the whispers of James Harden potentially coming back to Houston, growing in prominence. Now that has since exploded, with Adrian Wojnarowski on Christmas morning, right before the 76ers-Knicks game, dropping the bomb that Harden was seriously considering a return to Houston. We're not going to rehash what we said a week ago. Again, just check out our Lager Line archives for our thoughts on why, in most situations, it's a good fit. Not all of them. But I do want to talk about some of the new things that have surfaced this week from both Woj at ESPN and Jake Fisher of Yahoo, because I do think there's some small little things that we've learned that could tell us where this potentially goes in 2023. Again, not so much opinion based, but just talking about what's actually going to happen. And will a 34-year-old James Harden ultimately come back to Houston, the franchise where he was the second greatest player really in club history, and basically be the leader of Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., and we hope Wemby as they try and grow over the next few years. The Rockets will have the cap space up to $60 million next summer. It's just a matter of whether Harden is amenable to returning and whether he's the right fit from a Houston perspective for that money. So one of the common responses that I disagreed with immediately to the Woj story was that it was about leverage against Philadelphia, that Houston, as an interested bidder, basically it was just put out there by the Harden camp to pressure the Sixers into giving Harden a full max deal for 4 years, which honestly, as Paulo, you made the case last week on our podcast, wouldn't be that attractive to the Rockets either, locking themselves in for that long through Harden's age 37 season. That's pretty scary, especially since we've seen at least some decline the last couple of years. He's still an elite playmaker, but certainly not the just otherworldly isolation scorer that he was when he was at his absolute best in Houston 2 or 3 years ago. So a 4-year max deal, again, I would balk at that. I wouldn't go that far. But again, there's a lot of people assuming there. There's no concrete reporting. Actually, the concrete reporting from Zach Lowe of ESPN on the Low Post was that Harden is looking to do 1+1 deals, basically 1 year plus a player option, what he did last year with Philadelphia, because that gives him maximum control and leverage. And in that case, it's very low risk to the Rockets because they wouldn't be having to put that much long term into James Harden. You could basically use him as your point guard next year, see how it goes, and make a decision accordingly in the years after that. So in that scenario, and that's actual reporting, everything about, Harden just wants to pressure the Sixers into a 4-year max that they might not otherwise give him because of his age. Number one, there's no reporting to back that. And then secondly, the reason I never believe that, I know in this world of Twitter and Reddit, people always try and galaxy brain and think about the reasons for these leaks. But in this case, there would be no reason to leak that 7 months early. You could get the same bang for your buck by leaking this, oh, Harden's interested in Houston report in May after the Sixers have been eliminated from the playoffs, or perhaps not at all. If the Sixers go deep into the playoffs, that's the leverage, the fact that you're really good with him and you don't want to break up that team. If you don't, you can do the same thing in May without having it hang over your team the rest of the season. I can say pretty confidently that James Harden does not like having this storyline out there the same way he didn't like all the drama that surrounded him the last 4 to 6 weeks of his Brooklyn tenure. It just happened because, honestly, I mean, it's the truth. And at some point, people in the loop are either going to let it out, or people around the league who inevitably get brought into the discussions, someone's going to say it to a person who's connected to Woj or one of the big newsbreakers, and it's going to come out. In this case, again, I think it came out because it's the truth. There's no galaxy brain explanation. If James Harden wanted it simply for leverage, you could let that out in mid-May and get the same bang for your buck. You might even get more bang for your buck because at that point, the Rockets would be locked in with their strategy. It's so early now that conceivably things could change. Paolo, you made the point last week that it may not make sense if the Rockets are at number 2 in the lottery and get Scoot Henderson, who would then be basically your engine, your full-time point guard. At that point, James may not even make sense. So I don't think it's a leverage play, the reason why this leaked. And in fact, the reporting from Zach Lowe points to the opposite, that Harden doesn't want a long-term deal. He wants 1+1 deals. At this point, I think the simplest explanation is the most likely. It leaked because it's true, because it's out there that James Harden does have an interest in coming back to Houston. And whatever the reason may be, it's the truth. I think that's what's going on, much more than any sort of galaxy brain theory, which again doesn't even make sense because it can only hurt his chances of a championship this year, having this spectacle sort of hanging over the Philadelphia 76ers. So no, I don't believe it's a leverage play. I do believe it's genuine. I don't think it's a done deal. There's a ton of things that can change over the next 7 months, both in terms of certainly the Houston situation. If they get Scoot Henderson, that could potentially change things. In Philadelphia, how deep they get into the playoffs, what does the chemistry look like between Harden and Joel Embiid, between Harden and Doc Rivers as coach? There's so many variables, and so it's not a done deal. But at the same time, again, I think the most likely explanation is also the simplest one. It leaked because there's truth to it, because James Harden does have interest in going back to Houston. And another part of this story that I thought was very underappreciated at NBA Twitter was the follow-up reporting from Jake Fisher of Yahoo that the Houston possibility was as much on Brooklyn's mind when they traded Harden in February as his desire at that time to go to Philadelphia. And the reason I bring that up, of course, Brooklyn did not want to trade James Harden. They liked the big three with KD, James Harden, and Kyrie Irving. They just were worried about the possibility of Harden leaving them for no compensation, and it could have happened as soon as the 2022 offseason, which is when Harden had a player option to enter free agency. So Jake Fisher reported that those conversations were already known via back channels that Harden had interest in coming back to Houston. I personally can confirm that. I can tell you guys, as a little bit of news breaking, I first heard this around that same time period, late January, early February, when the whispers started to really grow that Harden wanted out of Brooklyn, that he was very interested in coming back to Houston one day. The timetable wasn't known, but the fact that James wanted back was not a secret. And the reason I bring that up, there's a lot of people who disagree with the Rockets going after James Harden for one reason or another. I think a lot of that is misguided. We talked about that last week. But a lot of folks have oversimplified it into the Rockets are just being emotional and impulsive. They want to bring back James Harden because he's the second best player in franchise history, and they love seeing him back in that Rockets jersey again, that there's not a lot of thought to it. And in my opinion, the fact that the interest goes back that long pushes back against that. Because here's the deal. If the Rockets wanted James Harden just because it's James Harden, regardless of how he fits, they could have made a play for him in 2022. When I was first told this in January or February, my initial response was, how soon? Are you interested in doing this in 2022? Because even though the Rockets did not have cap space, they could have made that work. They had a lot of one-year salaries expirings that...
Yeah, they had expiring John Wall, which was basically a 1-for-1.
Right. You also had Eric Gordon and Christian Wood. It would not have been difficult to make that work. The Rockets, when I asked about this, said, no, it's not the right time. And the biggest reason for that, of course, the Rockets have full control of their draft pick in 2023. They do not in 2024, which makes it a more reasonable time to look to the market for veteran upgrades that can help you win. We've talked about that plenty of times before. But I think for those that are oversimplifying it into being just an emotional decision and not strategic, again, it would not have been that hard for the Rockets to enter the James Harden market at the 2022 trade deadline or in the offseason. They didn't because it wasn't the right time. They had the assets, the one-year contracts that would not have been a big deal to Brooklyn, Philly, a third team, whoever it might have been. If they needed draft assets as sweetener, of course, they've got plenty of those from Brooklyn. The Rockets passed it up because it wasn't the right fit for them at the time. It might be in 2023. That's not to say that you can't disagree. And some of it is conditional. Again, I think I'm with you, Paolo, that if it's Scoot Henderson, it doesn't make sense. Whereas if it's Wemby, I think it absolutely does. We can talk about if it's one of the Thompsons. I think that's more of a gray area. But the Rockets aren't doing this just because it's James Harden and they're simply just going to say yes just because they're so desperate to have him back. They have already passed up an opportunity, and that's where I think that Jake Fisher report, and again, I can confirm that as well as someone on the ground in Houston, is noteworthy because it shows you the Rockets already have passed up this opportunity. They're not just going aggressively after James Harden just because it's James Harden. If it was that, they could have already made a push for that in the last few months. They didn't. They are going after him next summer if they do, because they believe it's strategic, because they believe it's in the best interest of transitioning this team into a winner. Even if it's not into a contender, going from where they are now into a winner is important. And of course, you can slide him next to Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., and your lottery pick in the 2023 draft, hopefully. So to me, that's an important distinction. I don't know where you are on this, Paolo, but seeing that Fisher report, and again, I can confirm that as well, it sort of pushes back on the idea that the Rockets are just thinking of this in emotional terms. They want James Harden just for the vibes, because Tillman Fertitta has said they're going to retire his jersey to the rafters one day. And of course, they made sure when he left that everybody's on good terms, and they want it just because. No, I think when you look at the actual timetable of this, it's pretty clear that if the Rockets do this, they're going to be doing it because they think it's actually in the best interest of the team, right?
Yeah, and I think first of all, we got to coin a term for this. Is it a ban bomb? We need to come up with something.
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, add us on Twitter if you have a better name than a ban bomb for when Ben breaks news. But knowing what you're saying right now, right? It also kind of implies that the Rockets want to do it on their terms. They already refused it once, and that gives me hope. That makes me hopeful that the argument that some people make about him coming here and this becoming his team again, or him coming here and him getting to, be able to tell the Rockets when he wants to practice and when he doesn't, something that came out when he left. Is he going to demand the Rockets to trade for another star to play with them, perhaps an older star that I would disagree with, right? The fact that the Rockets already passed on him once, to me, brings me a little bit more certainty that they want to do it on their terms, and then this is not we're going to coddle a star here for the next few years and do everything for James and kind of set the development of the young guys to the side. I don't think that's what I would hope that that's not what they're trying to do. So I think it's important, and it kind of dissipates some of the doubts about bringing James here in. Some people think he would be a bad influence. I kind of disagree as well, because, well, these guys, I'll put it very bluntly, I'm sure Jalen Green already knows what a strip club is. I'm sure he already's been to one.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like James Harden's not going to teach these guys all of these bad things. These guys are, 20-year-old millionaires. Okay, they're not, they're not just the random kid you pick up from school or whatever. But then besides that, there's a few there's a few details that I wanted to mention about the way it was reported. I think if it was to leverage anyone, it would probably be ownership, and even that I doubt it, because it's too early, like you said. And then listen, the GM's Daryl Morey. James Harden doesn't have to go through media channels to get to Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey gave him everything he wanted while he was in Houston. I'm sure, he traded for him when he was in Philly. James Harden is Daryl Morey's guy, and I don't think James has to go through, media channels trying to leverage anything out of Daryl Morey. their relationship is so good that Harden took a pay cut this year to get PJ Tucker, Daniel House, etc. On the team. So if there's a leverage play there, which I think is way too early for it, I think it would be on ownership. And I think it was reported widely that ownership trusts Daryl Morey and has given him free reign. So I'm not sure how much of this is leverage, especially considering James just took a pay cut, right? I don't think he was leveraged into a lesser salary. At least I think he willingly did it. And then besides that, I think the way it was reported, two things were mentioned. The first one was the confirmation by Woj, which is the biggest or second biggest, depending on if you prefer Shams or not, reported nationally that the Rockets are going to try and go big this free agency. If it might not be James Harden if that falls apart, it might be a trade for a star. It might be going after, I don't know, Miles Turner. It might be, the Rockets are going to try to win. The tanking is over this season. I think Woj actually mentioned tanking, which is surprising considering how much the NBA doesn't like the term. So I think that was important to notice as well.
And by the way, Tim McMahon in his follow-up podcast with Zach Lowe on the Low Post mentioned Kyrie Irving and said he wouldn't rule that out either in regards to potentially Kyrie. And I don't think you have both Kyrie and James Harden. You have to pick between the two. But even Kyrie Irving could be an option. And you have the bonus benefit of if you sign Kyrie Irving, of course, this is me speaking, not Tim, you could sort of destabilize Brooklyn and perhaps improve the value of those draft assets coming from the Nets in future years. If you want a galaxy brain take, that's a galaxy brain take. Sign Kyrie Irving to improve your draft assets, right?
That sounds really smart on paper, right? Really galaxy.
But it's
on
Kyrie,
paper.
yeah.
It's Kyrie Irving. I still can't do it. I think it would be as destabilizing for Brooklyn as it would be for us. So it's kind of a gamble.
Fair enough. Sorry for interjecting, but I just had to throw that in there where you were talking about the veteran options.
You're good. There's also people bring up D'Angelo Russell, who's having, I think, the last 20 games he's been like really, really good, and some people would like to bring him as the point guard, even though he has his defensive issues, and who knows what the current version of D'Angelo Russell is. But another thing that was mentioned on the reporting itself was that if James Harden came to Houston, it was mentioned that he would be giving up on his ring chasing so far, like the last couple of years of his career. Which is important because that's the mentality you want James Harden to come with. You don't want him to come here and try to, liquidate every asset to try and win right now. And that little tidbit of reporting indicates that as well. Then a couple more things is James was asked about it before the game, and he was fairly pissed that he was asked about it. But at the same time, he didn't outright deny it, right?
Bingo.
And we know James Harden's been through the media game the last 3 years plenty of times. In Brooklyn, he was back when he was in Houston. He's been playing this game for a little bit, and I don't think it's as innocent as it might seem that he ran away from the question instead of just outright denying it. So I think there's something there. And then just last night, we know he's close with our young guys, but just last night this is the Twitter follow in me. He commented on an Instagram post from Josh Christopher with him, KJ and Jalen, saying, I think it was hot boys or something like that.
Boys, yeah. Welcome to the NBA in 2022 or 2023, we should say.
Yeah. So there's, we know there's connections there. So it's.
For sure. Adam Spillane reported that, by the way, that Josh Christopher, Jalen, Jabari, KPJ all played ball with Harden over the summer at Toyota Center. So there's definitely connections.
Yeah. But then moving on, I don't know if you have anything else to speak about James Harden. I was going to move on to.
No, let's talk about the Encore product because, there's been some pretty promising signs the last few games. They lost in Boston, and that's night two of a road back-to-back. They won Monday in Chicago by 15, which was a pretty strong showing. KPJ having by far his best game of the season. I think the game before against Dallas, they lost, but it was a close game against a quality team. Luka had to go for 50 and 10 just to barely beat him in the last minute. So, they're playing better ball. What did you want to talk about in regards to their current play?
Yeah, we were just talking about James Harden, and depending on who you ask, most people, if you don't get Wemby, which is pretty much the only center in the top 8, 9, 10, depending on who you ask, people bring up, hey, if we sign James Harden, the next biggest hole would probably be either at center, depending on how you feel about Şengün and his fit with James Harden, or at small forward. And most people go to small forward because there's a lot of them in the top of the draft. Myself included, I mentioned Alsar Thompson, I mentioned Cam Whitmore. But I went back and I started thinking, and I think we're kind of underrating Tari Eason a little bit. I think he's been way better than expected, and his weakness has kind of been his biggest strength so far when he's been, how well he's been playing. And he might be a really good candidate to play at the 3 if you bring in James Harden, and perhaps just regardless. We know he is a terrific on-ball defender. We know he has an insane wingspan. We know he has good hands. He's great at getting steals, which is even better when he's at the 3 because 3s usually don't have the best of handles. So the primary guy he's going to be guarding most games is probably, going to play into his strength. Of course, and so I want to talk a little bit about Tari Eason. And I think so far this season, defensively, he's perhaps sometimes being a little bit over-eager playing defense, right? He'll try to completely, shut his defensive matchup down and not even let them get a shot up. And sometimes that will result in shooting fouls. Sometimes that will result in him, biting on pump fakes. Sometimes it will result in, not getting the best closeout because you're trying to get, an insane level of defense in, which is good, right? That's the right mindset to have. But sometimes I would rather him just get a good contest in, right, rather than go all in on a defensive possession. And I think that's like some other thing that I'm going to mention about him. That's something that comes with practice, and he's a rookie. You can expect a rookie to be perfect off the rip, and these habits or maybe bad habits that he has, those are things that he can only get better at with more reps, and that will tie into my overarching point, which is you should try. He's playing, I think, about 20 minutes a game, especially the last, I think, 10 games he's played 20 minutes a game. I would like to see more out of him. I know 20 minutes a game, it's already pretty good for a rookie. I would like to see more because I really think there's a lot of potential there. Yeah. And I think reps is exactly what he needs because otherwise it's all there. Offensively, his biggest weakness was supposed to be his 3-point shot. That's been his biggest strength. He's shooting 39% for the season. He's shooting 46% over his last 8 games, and we're finally seeing the volume increase. He's taken out of the last 8 games, I think 7 of them, he has 2 or more 3-point attempts. So the volume is finally creeping up, and it's not like a fake percentage of it being really early on in the season, I don't think. It's not like he's, even his makes, they look good. It's not the... I think
not Daishin Nix from early in the season when the numbers were there, but if you actually watched, the eye test told you that it wasn't going to be sustainable. It's not that.
Yeah, exactly. And so we know the outside shooting is there, which is probably the most important thing for a 3-and-D wing, which I think is what he equates to down the line in his career. Surprisingly, the tough part for him has been his decision making when he gets to the basket, and his 2-point percentage has not been great. And there are some, excuses, I'll say, for that. First of all, he's a terrific offensive rebounder. He gets 5 boards a game, and look at how crazy this is. He gets 5 boards a game as a wing, and out of those 5 boards, 2 of them, 40% of his boards are offensive. That's a volume of offensive rebounding compared to total rebounding that's just insane. And what that leads to is, tying into my next point, is his decision-making after getting an offensive rebound or after attacking a closeout and getting to the rim is not the best. He's always trying to finish it. He often takes contested layups or contested tip-ins over just grabbing the board and kicking it back out to the perimeter. And that leads to his 2-point percentage not being that great. He's missed a few bunnies as well. But the fact he's such a good offensive rebounder and how often that leads to tip-ins, and the fact that he's, if he's within range of the basket, he's going to attempt the layup, also tanks his 2-point percentage, right? And so how do you improve that? You improve that with reps. That's another mentality thing. It's not like he can't do it. It's, let's get him reps and let's, tell him, okay, let's pay attention to this, Tari. You grabbed an offensive rebound. If there's 3 guys contesting your layup, kick it back out because I'm sure there's someone out there that's open for a 3-point shot. And so he's these little things away from being a really, really good 3-and-D wing. The tools are there. The defense is there.
Yeah.
The mobility is there. The 3-point shot's there. Not only the 3-point shot, he's shooting 84% from the line, which is not surprising if you saw him at LSU. He wasn't, I think, an 80% free throw shooter. But everything's there. It's only missing.
Well, and it's important because his style of play, even though he's not really a creator, he's so aggressive on those drives that he is going to have like a healthy amount of free throws that he takes. Like, for example, this month of December, where his numbers, they're so good for the month overall, like 9 points, 5 boards in 20 minutes, shooting 48% from the field, 46% from three, 83% from the free throw line. The volume is pretty good on not just, random mid-range shots, but of course he gets to the rim and he's taking more threes at more than 2 per game in 20 minutes, which is strong. But he's also averaging nearly 2 free throws per game in 20, which when you look at his style of play, it's not bad because he's aggressively attacking the rim. A lot of Rockets fans throw out the comparison to Corey Brewer, and it's a little superficial because Corey just happens to be someone with Eason's body type who recently played with the Rockets. But even if, we don't look at it as truly an apples to apples, look, if you can have Corey Brewer and add the current 3-point shot of Tari Eason, that's a really good and valuable player, and one that we've already seen can play well next to James Harden, right?
Yeah, and for example, Tari Eason is currently sitting at 53% true shooting. I think league average is somewhere between 55 and 57. It kind of fluctuates over the last 3 or 4 seasons. It kind of stabilized. That's not very efficient, especially for a guy that's shooting 39% from 3. But the truth is, this is a 3-and-D wing. He doesn't get creation reps. So it's not like he's inefficient and he's taking shots away from other people. It's like most of the shots that he does get, it's him creating it. It's him, it's extra opportunities that he gets from his hustle. So it's extra possessions that he's generating. It's not passing the ball to him and him being a black hole and then not passing the ball back. It's most of the time he's either attacking an advantage, which is the correct decision. He's just not defining correctly at the end of it. And on the other times, it's an offensive rebound. It's a steal. It's in transition. His efficiency shouldn't be taken as, the same thing as when a shooting guard is just jacking up shots. It's not that. He's not being very efficient within the possessions that he's the extra possession that he's generating. And so to kind of, put a bow on it, I think it's important for him to get more reps because the small issues he has are mostly decision-making based. It's the tunnel vision when driving to the basket, which is something that it's normal as a rookie. The game slowing down for you is something that nearly all rookies across the NBA always talk about. That comes from, more reps. That comes from playing more minutes. The knowing when to play good defense and when to play stifling defense is also important because he can do both. It's about picking the right moments to do either. If you're playing against DeMar DeRozan, you probably want to just, play good defense because he's going to draw a foul and he's really crafty in the way that he scores. If you're playing against, I don't know, a different type of player, none comes to mind right now. You probably want to play stifling defense because ball pressure bothers them. Hey, if you're playing defense against Jalen Green, you probably want to play stifling defense because he's going to struggle with ball pressure, for example. And so all of these things are normal for a rookie, and I'm really impressed with what Tari has done so far. I'm really excited for him, and this is why I'm giving him a shout out for he should be in contention to be the starting small forward next year. We shouldn't be, actively looking for ways to fill that hole because it might not be a hole after all. I'm just defending that we should play him more. So by next season, we know if he's the guy that we should, why would you give one of the best small forwards in free agency, regardless of how you think about his IQ, why would you give, I don't know, if you strike out on James Harden, why would you give Kelly Oubre 15 to 20 million a year when you have Tari Eason waiting to play? And
yeah, good point.
There's a very realistic chance that even though Kelly Oubre is the better player right now, that Tari Eason will be the better player even by next season. We just need to know, and we need to give him enough opportunities to know if he's ready for that yet. So yeah, this is not a criticism of Tari Eason thing. It's he's so close to being one of the best 3-and-D wings in the league because there's not a huge range when it comes to 3-and-D wings. There's the guys that are good at shooting and okay at defense. There's the guys that are okay at shooting and good at defense. There's the guys that only do one of them. And I could provide you with examples of each one. I've done so before, but Tari Eason right now, he has the shot and he has the defense. He's only missing the playing time to work through the decision-making mistakes that he's making right now, which are not uncommon for a rookie. Is mostly what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, and that's honestly what this season should be about, experimenting, and perhaps the second half of this year is a good opportunity to scale up those minutes and see how much of this holds over a larger sample, because you're right, what he's done in this 20 minutes per game role off the bench has been fantastic. You cannot reasonably ask for more from a rookie in the NBA than what he's done with his current role. And in a season like this, yeah, you do need to experiment, and so we may be getting to a point where, hey, it makes sense to see what is actually going to hold when we go from 20 minutes against largely backups to 25 to 30 minutes per game against starters. Perhaps when Eric Gordon inevitably gets dealt, it's Tari Eason and not KJ Martin who makes the most sense to experiment with at the 3, because with KJ, we know there's limitations in terms of perimeter defense. We saw in the Boston game in particular, some of the blow-bys were becoming an issue, whereas with Tari, wow, he is truly a two-way player. And if that shooting stroke holds, which it has to this month, and the most encouraging thing, it's continuing to do so even as the volume increases, then yeah, you really have something there. And in a season that's about experimenting, that could be one of your next ones. I know it's year one, but guess what? You're playing Jabari Smith Jr. 30 minutes a game. It's not unheard of. Maybe Tari Eason is ready for that as well. Another guy.
Just
sorry,
before you move on to the next side. Especially if James Harden comes in, I forgot to make this point. Especially if James Harden comes in, James Harden is not the best defender, especially on the ball. We know this from when he was here. It's even worse now. You've got James Harden, Jalen Green, and who knows who at center. It might be Sengun. Not the best defenders, even though I believe Jalen will get there. Having a wing tandem of Jabari Smith and Tari Eason would play a huge role. In most teams have 2 stars. And so you could the ways you could assign these defenders, like they have 2 really good on-ball defenders that are switchable in Tari and Jabari on the floor at the same time would be huge. And the last thing I would mention is, I know steals and blocks don't define defense at all, but and if you back this up with the eye test, Tari Eason is a good on-ball defender. It's not like one of those guys that gambles for steals and if he doesn't get the steal, he gets a blow by. James Harden was like that when he was in Houston for a long time. He's getting 1.1 steals a game and half a block in 19 minutes. If you scale that up to per 36, which is not ideal, I usually try to make the math to per 30 or per 32, which is usually what our guys are playing right now. Regardless, that's 2.2 steals and a block as a wing. That's really like those are insane block and steal numbers for a rookie. He'll get better than what he is right now, and so just wanted to throw that out there, especially in a world where you bring in an offensive star to be your lead point guard, be that James Harden, be that D'Angelo Russell. They usually are not the best defenders, and having a wing tandem that's actually elite at it. KJ is good, don't get me wrong, but he's not the on-ball monster that Tari is and has the potential to become as well.
Another guy who could fit into that mix as an option at small forward, be it starting or off the bench, if you bring in a James Harden or D'Angelo Russell type, is actually Kevin Porter Jr., who of course now is your point guard, but at 6'6" and with elite catch and shoot numbers, has the potential, of course, to play on the wing if you need him to, and that may be the role he's asked to do after this season if the Rockets go after a primary playmaker like James Harden or D'Angelo Russell. And this week has been really encouraging for KPJ, especially offensively. He's averaging 29 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds, and only 1 turnover in 37 minutes per game, 55% shooting, 44% on threes. We're recording this Thursday morning before the Dallas game, so of course that's going to shift the numbers a little bit. But regardless of how he plays tonight, it's still going to be an encouraging week for KPJ. And of course, there's little things you can point to. Certainly, it can be randomness. It's a small sample. We acknowledge that off the top. he's getting more reps with his teammates. He's talked about watching film, and he got to do more of that over Christmas because they had 2 consecutive days off. Perhaps they benefited from that. I also think that maybe having Ty Washington over Dacian Nix helps him, because when Kevin is playing with the second unit, when we see Steven Silas try to stagger in that way, then I think Washington is much less of a liability. His ability to actually shoot from 3 and take them at decent volume makes defenders respect that area on the floor a bit more, as opposed to those Knicks Garuba lineups were very clunky from a spacing perspective. That could help out KPJ. And even when he's not staggering, I think just simply having a functional backup point guard reduces the temptation for Kevin and Jalen when they check back in the second and fourth quarters to feel like they have to be Superman to try and dig the Rockets out, like what we saw in the Orlando game, for example. So I think there's all sorts of little things you could point to that, help explain this beyond just the obvious, hey, he got hot, and it's a very small sample. Another thing that I would point to, though, Tim McMahon had a very interesting theory on that Low Post podcast, in that KPJ has responded with these games, including the one in Chicago, 36-9, and the Rockets winning that game by 15, immediately after the Harden report dropped on Christmas morning. And what Tim was getting at in his theory was that maybe that lit a fire under KPJ, because of course the Rockets, they're not immune to these discussions and hearing about them. I'm sure it raised a few eyebrows in the locker room. And for KPJ to immediately respond after that report, the guy who's currently your point guard, and of course the guy who would be being replaced, at least in that capacity, if you bring in a James Harden, for him to respond in that way, it's encouraging. Now, you certainly don't want to change your future based on 2 games. You would need to see it a lot longer than just a few games in 1 week to feel like, okay, Kevin Porter Jr. has figured it out. But I do think that maybe there could be something to the idea that he's playing to sort of make a point after, the reports leaked, that the Rockets could be looking at guys like James Harden to take his job, or at least part of his job, in future seasons. And I think it speaks well to Kevin that, he channeled that energy in a positive way, that perhaps he was able to feed off of those reports and use it to, his betterment as a basketball player, at least in the short term, and basically treat it as fuel as opposed to, sulking and feeling bad. So I don't know how much of that is true. There's a lot of small sample randomness to it as well. But if you do believe the McMahon theory, to me, I view it as a positive, that he's sort of channeling this in a positive direction, and maybe the Rockets can feed off this in the short term. What are your thoughts on that as a plausible theory?
I think it's definitely plausible. I do think there's also some on the court things that explain it. To me, the biggest deal, even more than his scoring, is his turnover numbers. He had 9 assists and 2 turnovers in the Chicago game, and he had 9 assists and no turnovers in the Celtics game. Yeah, the Celtics game. That's, for context, for KPJ, the Boston game was the first, 0 turnover game that he's had this season. It was the first 0 turnover game he's had in his last 50 games dating back to last season. In his entire career, he only has 1 other game with more than 5 assists and 0 turnovers. And Boston is a really good defense. It's one of the best defenses in the league. So something's definitely changed. And then on the court, it's easy to notice that he's being used off the ball a little bit more. He's moving the ball more willingly, and he's getting more catch and shoot threes, which is something that the fan base has wanted for a long time. And that's been working for his efficiency as well. That plus he just looks more intentional out there. It sometimes looks like when KPJ is playing that he's somewhat restricted in what he's trying to do. He goes and he repeats the same motions on the court that he, like, possession after possession after possession, to the same bad results. And the last 2 games, it has looked like he's been more intentional in the sense of when he's getting penetration, he's intentionally going for it. He's not waiting for something else to happen. He's not we often watch him and we see he goes through an action, let's call it a screen, and then he's waiting for the action on the other end of the floor to end before he makes a decision on what he's trying to do. His killer mentality has been way better these last 2 games. He's been more intentional, whether that is getting to the basket, whether that is getting to a mid-range shot, which he has taken plenty these last 2 games and hit them, whether that is being decisive when he gets a catch and shoot 3 to letting it fly even though a contest is coming. Sometimes he will doubt those shots. We saw him take a movement 3 catch and shoot from the corner. Right, that's a shot that KPJ normally doesn't take. That's a shot that's a confidence shot, and that's like an intentional shot. And I think that's been one of the big differences. And if it has something to do with James Harden, hey, we should start leaking that more. We're interested in more point guards because this is the vision with Kevin.
Bullying works, right?
Yeah, bullying works. This is the vision with KPJ. He looked like a lot more natural of a player, like he was unchained to some extent.
Yeah. And I also think it's interesting. You mentioned him being a bit less ball dominant in terms of his approach. And of course, that's coincided with 2 really good games from Jalen Green to start this road trip in Chicago and Boston. Jalen scoring 26 points a game on 54% shooting, 43% on threes at extremely high volume of 10.5 per game. So some very encouraging stuff there. But I think, again, small sample. But if we're seeing KPJ transition into doing a bit more off ball, then to me, this builds the case for optimism that he can still fit alongside a guy like James Harden, or if you end up with Scoot Henderson in the draft instead, something like that. So the idea that he has to be a point guard to succeed, this sort of pushes back on it because, again, we're seeing Jalen Green, when he's shooting the way he has the last couple of games, of course, he's going to be a bit more ball dominant in terms of initiating your offense. And we're seeing KPJ succeed off the ball as well and sort of fall in line accordingly when there is a playmaker or a shot creator capable of taking on that greater burden. So to me, again, small sample, we have to keep throwing out that caveat, but it does provide optimism that down the line, KPJ's role is scalable if there's appropriate playmakers or shot creators to take on that burden, right?
Yeah. So the way I see it, and I've talked about this earlier on the pod, I mentioned that when you scale KPJ back down to less usage, the fact that he's played the Luka role in Salas's system for these, 1.5 probably going to be 2 years, and we've made the argument about the square peg into a round hole thing, you're going to end up with someone who's overqualified for the usage he's going to get when he gets on a winning team, rather than where he is now, which is an underqualified starting point guard in a heliocentric system. If you imagine KPJ, even if he is at the point guard position, if he's not, he can be at the point guard position and not be the lead ball handler. It happens plenty of times. Marcus Smart plays the point guard position for the Celtics a lot of the time, and he's not the lead ball handler all the time. If we look at him in more of a Marcus Smart role, or more of a maybe Malcolm Brogdon to some extent, if we back when he was with the Pacers, of course, if we maybe think of him as more of a Patrick Beverly role, and I'm trying to think of examples that are not, defensive specialists, but that type of more off the ball point guard, that doesn't have to happen with James Harden coming in. It doesn't have to be James Harden comes in as a point guard and then Jalen is the shooting guard and KPJ slots into the 3. Just bringing in a guy like Victor Wembanyama might do that as well. If Wembanyama comes in, he is the star of this team along with Jalen Green. Those two are going to take 20 plus shots a game. And as a result of that, KPJ is going to take less shots. That could be happening right now if we played more through Şengün. KPJ would naturally slot back into a smaller role, but it's the thing of he's eventually when he slots back into that role, he'll be overqualified for it, and he'll look amazing. And there will be games where he'll pop off because he's got it going, and so you feed him the ball more, and you'll start having such high expectations of him. I don't think the position matters as much as the usage has. And then besides that, the team in general and him as well has made a point this last couple of games to feed Şengün when he has mismatches, even Jabari Smith when he has mismatches. They've been intentional about doing it. It's early in the shot clock. They see the mismatch, they try to feed it. It has led to some turnovers because they're not the best at entry passes, but they've made it a point. Alperen Şengün had 25 points against the Bulls. I think he had 0 points against the Celtics, but in that first quarter, they fed the post with Şengün so often, and that's what. And sometimes let's turnovers, as I said, but sometimes when we care about the process and not so much about the results. That was a prime example of it. Alperen Şengün was consistently getting Marcus Smart on him during that first quarter, and they were going to him. They were identifying the mismatch and going to it. Did it produce results? No. Şengün was, I think, 0 for 3 that game. And if you add the couple of turnovers that resulted from it, they were trying to make the right play and it wasn't working. To me, that's fine. If they make the right play and miss the shot, that's fine. That's to me that's way better than taking a step back 3 and ISO early in the shot clock and it going in, for example.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what we mean when we mean process. And so going back to KPJ, I think if it had something to do with the James Harden thing, who knows? But it kind of vindicates the whole theory that once KPJ slots back into a lesser role, whether that is as a starting point guard but on more of an off-ball role with two ball handlers or stars that play different roles, be that Wemby and Jalen or Harden and Jalen, or at the 3 if you draft the point guard and all of a sudden you have Scoot Henderson and Jalen as the lead ball handlers and KPJ takes more of a back seat. Whether that is right now, you could do that right now. You could make Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün the main ball handlers and have KPJ take more of a back seat. That would lead to the same results. Eventually, so as a point guard, as a small forward, or even as a 6-man, if you decide that you want to plug in a more defensive small forward next to two dynamic lead guards, and KPJ gets to cook against second units, those KPJ in that role is going to look a lot better. Mm-hmm. And I think we're starting to see it, even though he's popped off, and it's easy to say now. You can connect the fact that he's popped off with the way that he was being used in these games.
Fair. All right, as we wind down our podcast today, we're going to transition from the micro to more macro because, as I said leading off, we're aware that this is the New Year's holiday. We're going to be transitioning the next few days from 2022 to 2023, and this is going to be a really big pivot point for the Houston Rockets as a franchise. All the salary cap room, you have your last draft pick in all likelihood. The 2024 headed to OKC is top 4 protected, but we hope that doesn't come into play. If it does, your odds are basically 50-50 at best, so it's certainly not something you want to plan around. So the odds are this coming spring is going to be the last time you're truly in the tanking tier, if you will, and trying to lose games for the sake of a draft pick. And of course, next summer, between the cap room and the incentive shift with the draft package due to Oklahoma City, then you're going to be trying to win games. So 2023 is going to be a big shift. We'll see if James Harden is a part of that. And it's going to be a very fun year of Rockets basketball because there's going to be something for everybody. If you're interested in prospects and tanking and following the draft and upgrading your team through basically prospect development, you can enjoy the first 6 months of the year. When we see how the current Rockets finish the season, we see what happens with the top prospects for the 2023 draft. We see what happens in the draft lottery, who the Rockets take in June. And in the back half of the year, we see what the Rockets do with their cap space in free agency or trades, perhaps going after veterans like James Harden. And then, of course, starting in the fall, it'll be a mix likely of veterans and this young core you have now. But instead of being in the tanker tier as they currently are, by the end of 2023, you're going to be actually trying to win games. So it's going to be a very interesting year. And on the back half of this podcast, I want to talk about both wrapping up the year that was in 2022 and also looking ahead to 2023. And we're going to be doing this through, I suppose, some honors, if you will. Basically, my list: best game, best moment, worst moment, most improved player, most disappointing player, and then looking ahead to 2023, what's going to be the best moment, who's going to be the most improved player for that year. Not going to say who's going to be the most disappointing player in 2023. We want to keep it optimistic because 2023 is going to be a great year where we get Wemby, right?
Hopefully, dude. I won't give up too much ahead of the awards. We'll see for y'all.
Yeah.
A few seconds.
Okay. Well, I'll start with you. The way we're going to do this, again, these honors/awards, one of us is going to go first, and then the other will offer their award after that. The caveat is that the person going second has to come up with a different answer than the person going first. So, for example, best moment of 2023. By far, the easy answer for that would be getting Wemby. However, it would be boring if we both say the same thing. So one of us will get to say that, and then the other will get to take it a different direction. That's just to sort of spotlight a lot of different things and not have it just be us agreeing with one another. Because, of course, in all of these, there's multiple things you can point to. It's not just a one-size-fits-all answer. And so we want to give at least a couple of possibilities in each of these categories. Paolo, I'll let you start. Best game of the year that was in 2022.
Huh. Okay, I was hoping that you'd start because I have like three answers for this one, and I was wondering if you were going to pick the same, like one of the same games as I did.
Okay,
So
if you want to pass, then I'll go first.
I'll
And
pass. You can go
this
first.
is going to be recency bias, but I'm going to go with the Milwaukee game earlier this month. For the Rockets to win a game like that, not just with offense, because we know the type of talent they have with Jalen Green and Kevin Porter Jr. leading the way. We've seen what can happen when those guys get hot. But to win a game defensively, to really shut down the Bucks in the fourth quarter, hold them to 92 points on the game, to see Jabari Smith Jr. take on the responsibility late of defending Giannis, it was a good reminder of what the Rockets have with Jabari Smith Jr. and Tari Eason this current draft class, and why it's not just about the upside of these guys as scorers and playmakers, but that they do take seriously the other end of the court as well. The fact that we saw the Rockets beat an NBA title contender with defense, not offense. KPJ had a couple of big plays defensively late in that game as well. To me, that was really encouraging. So I'm going Milwaukee. It was a loud Rockets environment at Toyota Center. It was fun. Jabari on Giannis, everybody saw the job he did individually. And I just think collectively for a young team, winning with defense was a really great sign, and I enjoyed it so much.
Okay. You didn't pick any of the games that I had. So I'll do honorable mentions first, and then I'll pick the one that I ended up picking. Honorable mentions is the Lakers game. When Jalen Green came through in the clutch. I think that was still this year.
Yeah, that was March. I almost picked that one.
Yeah. So LeBron was playing as well, so it always adds a special taste to it. The Atlanta game against Trae Young and DeJounte Murray when they were talking a bunch of shit and lost the game in the end. That was a good game as well.
Little fella.
Exactly. And then the other one I have to bring up is the last game of the season because I was at the Toyota Center and Jalen dropped his career high, so that's a big one as well. But the one I'm going to pick, and perhaps it's a little bit of recency bias, I'm going to pick the Bulls game from 2 games ago.
Okay.
Because offensively, I think that's the best we've seen the entirety of the young car look. Well, first of all, Daishan Nix didn't play. So that's a plus. But we saw KPJ show what he can look like in a smaller role. That's a huge deal. That's a real asset that you have there. If he can be a good I know he can be, but if he can like switch back into a more off-ball role, the fact that he had very few turnovers as well, the fact that we won the game, that's good. And then we saw from Sengun, he had an extremely efficient game. He had 25, 11, and 6. He had 2 blocks and a steal. He just filled the stat sheet. And at the same time, Jalen Green also had a good game. Efficient, just didn't make his 2 free throws, which is kind of a qualm of mine because I check after every game to see if he's at 80% again for his career, and he still isn't. It's always 79 point something. And even Jabari had didn't have the best offensive game, but he had a 2 steal, 2 block game. It was one of those games where everything was working. And in a season where we complain so much, that was one of the games that I could barely find anything to complain about. I think the only thing I could, nitpick about it was the fact that Tai only played 7 minutes and Eric Gordon played like 35. But other than that, that was all like, I just loved that game. And, we saw kind of the vision and everything fitting together. So that's my pick.
All right, next is best moment. And I want to make clear our distinction between best game and best moment. A game is about the product between the lines. A moment certainly can be, but a moment also incorporates things off the court. Like, for example, the draft lottery, the draft itself, any trades you make. Moment can be a lot of different things that happen to the franchise. So we'll be a bit more broad with this. Paolo, since I went first for best game, I'll let you go first for best moment. What's your top moment of 2022 for the Houston Rockets?
This is going to come off petty as hell, but hey, there's a couple others here that you aren't going to like, but I'm actually going to go with the best moment of 2022. My honorable mention is Tari Eason dropping 17 because everybody wanted him in Rockets Twitter and everybody was really happy when he fell. I think at 16, the Hawks had Tari Eason or AJ Griffin, and so I was happy with either, but I was really happy that Tari was the one that fell. Was really high on him prior to the draft, and it's kind of one of those moments where, the fantasies you make during the draft cycle kind of come to fruition a little bit. That's my honorable mention. My best moment of 2022 was when the KD trade request news came out, because for a moment there, it looked like we had everything. It looked like Brooklyn was about to fall apart. It doesn't look as likely right now, but it looked like Brooklyn was about to fall apart. They were going to trade KD. We were about to get 2 shots at Wemby. For those
Yeah.
few weeks, it looked like those Brooklyn picks were about to be top picks really early on, and so everybody was really excited. I remember being on the Spaces right after the news came out. So it was a moment of, everybody at the same time was really happy, and it ended up not materializing, but, it felt really good while it was happening.
So for me, I was torn between two. The obvious one would be draft lottery night, because you only had about a 40% shot, even though the Rockets were the worst team in the 2021 to 22 season. You only had about a 40% shot of being top three. And this was a draft in which clearly there was a drop off after those top three. In some order, Paolo Banchero, Jabari Smith Jr., Chet Holmgren, those were your top three. The Rockets also already had a backcourt cornerstone in Jalen Green. So for them to get in the top three and get one of those front court players to build around for the future, it was a big question. And so when the Rockets avoided having their card come out at the draft lottery for not just pick 5, which was their floor, but also pick 4. And so we knew that they were going to get one of those 3 big front court pieces. That was very fortuitous because, again, it wasn't incredibly unlikely, but it was less than 50-50. So all in all, that's a pretty positive result. And of course, draft lottery is always a fun night. But I actually went with, for my best moment, and of course this will incorporate a number of games, but the Jalen Green 30-point streak near the end of last season. Because as much as the 2022 draft does matter, we all went into this year's draft knowing that it wasn't quite as top heavy as the previous year. Certainly Banchero, Jabari, these are nice players, but they don't quite have the foundational potential of the top of the 2021 draft with guys like Cade Cunningham and Jalen and Evan Mobley. We knew the 2021 draft had the potential to be special. That's why, of course, the Rockets were on pins and needles to see if they could get in the top 4, especially because, of course, the pick swap would have activated and dropped them to 18 if the 48% shot had activated and their number had not come out in the top 4. That draft is a bit more important. And for a lot of last season, it looked like Evan Mobley was the better player. And I guess statistically, you can still make that argument. Now, I know it's not an apples to apples comparison. They have very different styles of play, and a big is inherently going to be much more efficient, especially early in his NBA career. But I can remember even in early March, I was watching a game at Toyota Center on Media Row with Jackson Gatlin, host of Locked On Rockets, and Jalen still, he'd shown a few signs starting in February of breaking out, but nothing really sustained. And it was a game very early in March. He did not have it going at all. And we looked at each other and said, man, if they messed up that pick, it's going to be so bad. I can't remember the exact words we used, but I mean, it was basically that, because at the time, Evan Mobley had largely outplayed him. And pretty much from that point forward, the next week was the Utah game that they took to overtime. Then they beat Memphis and the Lakers, the game you referenced. The streak came later that month. The consistency is still not there. That's to be expected given Jalen's player archetype. But we've seen the upside, and that streak putting him in rare air, basically just Jalen, Michael Jordan, and Allen Iverson in terms of players to go that many consecutive games as rookies scoring 30-plus points. It shows you why Rafael Stone drafted Jalen Green, and that potential is in fact there, that he can be the best guy in his draft class and potentially, the top scorer on an NBA title contender. Is he there yet? Absolutely not. There's a long way to go. But that stretch showed you that the potential is there. That's why he got on the all-rookie first team. And to me, not just for Jalen himself, that stretch was really important because it validated the process. It validated what Rafael Stone and his staff saw in Jalen Green that made them select him over Evan Mobley in a very talented draft class. So to me, that's why I viewed it as the best moment. As good as the 2022 draft potentially could be, and I think it's solid, the 2021 should be better. And so getting those early returns to somewhat justify your selection in 2021, the reality is, as good as Jabari may or may not be, I doubt he's ever going to be the best player on a contender. He can be a really, really good role player and perhaps an all-star if everything goes right, but I don't think he's going to be the guy who you turn to late in a big playoff game and say, go get me that bucket. Jalen Green could be. Not saying he will, but he could be. And so to get some validation on that, and I think especially late in his rookie season, that 30-point streak, to me, that was a really encouraging moment. So that's why I'm going to go with that for my choice.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, what you just said, I think a comparable tandem is, hey, Jaren Jackson Jr. is a really good player, but the guy's Ja Morant, right, on that team, and I think it's a similar dynamic there. But I am going to say that you cheated. So you said moment, and then you picked like 2 months.
Oh, geez. It wasn't 2 months. It was 6 games. Whatever.
Okay, sure. I'll justify a little bit why I didn't pick the lottery night, although I was really happy about it. It was mostly because of how unanimous it was that people were happy. When it was the KD trade request, everybody was buzzing.
Okay.
When it was the lottery night, there were people that were still. It wasn't one of. We talked about this on back then. I think it was the Launchpad, but like I was not disappointed, but there were some people that were. So I couldn't name it best moment if there were still some people that were unhappy.
People that were expecting the one. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why I didn't go with it. But
okay.
So I went first last time. It's you going first for worst moment, and people are going to hate me for this one, so I'll let you go first.
Okay. Worst moment of 2022 for me, it was actually New Year's Day. Everything that happened against the Nuggets with Christian Wood not wanting to go back in the game, KPJ leaving the arena at halftime. Now the KPJ part had a happy ending because a week later, he came back from his suspension and he seemed to grow as a person. He talked about that, and then he hit the buzzer beater in Washington, and there haven't been any incidents since. And so credit to KPJ, he seems to have learned and developed from that. He's just 22 years old. That was year 3 in the NBA, basically his year 2 because of all the how tumultuous the second season was with the trade and all the other off-court issues. And the Rockets knew going in that KPJ, the anger issues were real. It's going to be something that takes time and experience for him to work on. And I do think we've seen growth since then. But for me, I don't look back in hindsight and see the New Year's Day incident as that alarming for KPJ in particular. And also we should note that even though, certainly it's not acceptable to get in your car and leave the arena midway through, no matter how frustrated you are, even if your coach says you're not going to play, look, he was responding to things that happened elsewhere. It did not start with him. That's a small distinction, but I do think it's noteworthy. Where I view New Year's Day as so problematic, and of course it led to the eventual trade of Christian Wood in June to Dallas, it sort of shut the door on the idea that Christian Wood was ever going to be either a foundational piece for you or the type of trade piece that could get you a great return. Because you had heard the whispers before about some of the concerns off the court. Paolo, you had noted them ad nauseum on Twitter, but we hadn't had the full-on confirmation until then. For Christian to show up late for his COVID test in the morning, which is what really started the whole chain of events. Back then they had to do daily tests. They were in town because, of course, it was back-to-back. They played New Year's Eve at home, as they always do. For Christian to miss his morning test, to not show up on time, to not do his basic assignments, then to pout and not want to go back in the game when things go south. And then, of course, the suspension that resulted from that. It just validated all the concerns, the whispers that were out there about Christian Wood not having the right mentality to be a true star in the NBA, to really take advantage of all of his gifts as a big with, of course, great shooting ability, some creation skills, athleticism, an ideal, pick and roll man when he's committed to that. Still wish we would have gotten to see more of James Harden and Christian Wood, with Wood in the role that Clint Capella had for so many years. Unfortunately, we only got like 8 or 9 games of that before Harden left in early 2021. But when we saw that happen against the Nuggets, I was just personally very resigned to the idea that they were going to have to trade him, and it wasn't going to be for a lot in return, that he wasn't a part of the future. And ultimately, it wasn't like they cut him. They did get a future first-round pick that basically became Ty Washington as part of the deals that they made in June. So it's not nothing, but to me, that incident just validated the fact that, Christian Wood is who the people around the league thought he was. A talented player, but also limitations, not just with his defense, but with his approach as well. And so it just sort of, to me at least, underscored the idea that, be it sticking with Christian long-term or what you trade him for, he's not going to be that star we hoped he might be, early in his first season with the Rockets. This just is who he is. And the Rockets did the best they could and got, again, Ty Washington is not a bad asset. So Rafael Stone made the best of a bad situation. But for me, that was the worst moment because it just sort of confirmed that Christian Wood was not that guy. And ultimately, it led to Christian Wood not being on the team this season. That's my worst moment.
Okay. I'm noticing that I'm having a little bit of a different approach.
Okay.
My worst moment, and I'll get into it in a little bit, but I kind of picked it as the moment where I felt the worst, right? Rather than kind of trying and being objective and thinking, oh, what's the worst moment for the team, right? And that'll justify what I'm going to say later. But because what you said, I mean, to me, that game was something that was bad, but had good implications in the future because I already didn't believe in Christian Wood before, and if that game was the final nail on the coffin, it might have been bad that game for a good reason. For KPJ, I always kind of saw that as when people have anger issues, one of the things that they're told is if you feel yourself getting angry, remove yourself from the situation. And to me, that's what KPJ did. There were problems. Yeah. And it's unprofessional. I'm not defending it. I'm just saying I can see some logic behind just leaving rather than throwing a tantrum and creating more damage than you already have.
Yeah. And by the way, I should have mentioned one of the most damning reports was from Tim McMahon a few days later. He never said who the player was, but in his story at ESPN, he mentioned that there was someone else in the locker room who looked at Christian Wood and said, "You're supposed to be a leader," basically saying, why the hell are you basically causing this when we, the younger guys, are supposed to look up to you as someone that's a leader? Yeah, that's what I was getting at. To me, that's why the Christian angle, with him having 6 or 7 years in the league and being 26 or 27 years old at the time, to me, that was much more troubling than the KPJ.
Yeah, and so considering that I wanted Christian Wood gone, and I was afraid that he developed into that leader when to me he's not good enough of a player or of a leader to be that, kind of didn't bother me that much in the grand scheme of things. now I've got to say this because I already teased it too much and I can't change it now. My worst moment of 2022 was the first 10 minutes of the draft show I made on Twitter, on Spaces back then. We had 1,000 people listening live, and people. I wasn't on the spot back then, but some of the people might remember. I was a big Paulo guy.
Right.
And it was basically all the leads pointed to we getting Paulo.
Yeah.
And the moment it was confirmed that Orlando was taking Paulo Banchero #1, I muted my microphone and I didn't speak for like 30 minutes.
By the way,
I was devastated, dude.
To bring this full circle, I remember 20 minutes before the draft when Woj put out that tweet, and I nearly crashed my car. I was going over to David Wiener's house, Fema Thug on Twitter. He does his annual draft party, and I was just floored. And to bring this pod full circle, we were talking about, people galaxy braining the Woj report on Harden and saying, well, this must be just a leverage thing. I remember so many people on Twitter coming up with these scenarios that no, it wasn't real, that Orlando was still taking Jabari. It was just a leak to pressure the Rockets into trading up to 1. And we just need to stay firm, blah, blah, blah. No, in many cases, the easiest explanation or the simplest explanation is also the most accurate, which is Woj reported that because it was true, and Orlando did take Paolo, and we'll never know why they handled it exactly the way they did. But yeah, it just reminded me of the whole Harden thing because, again, people are trying to find these like 4-dimensional chess explanations for, in reality, what was pretty simple. The Magic just decided, it was a very curious process, but they just decided in the last 30 minutes before the draft, and it made for a very dramatic night on Rockets Twitter, that they were taking Paolo.
So besides that, we started the show. We ran a Spaces throughout the entire day. I left to go have lunch. I left to go have dinner, and the rest of the day I was on Spaces all day. And then the final space I created it 30 minutes more or less, or 45 minutes before the draft started, and one of the rules was everybody was turning notifications off, so I didn't have notifications. The only lead I had that it might happen was because the Vegas odds changed
the night before,
at 4 a.m. my time. So I usually go to sleep really late. I was really nervous, and I remember I went to sleep the day before, and I woke up at 7. I went to sleep at like 4, and then I woke up at 7 a.m. and I just have a bunch of people messaging me. There's a space going on. The Vegas odds are messing up, and I'm like, no, please no. And so I was kind of hanging on to hope. For context, as I said, I was really high on Paul. He's probably my favorite prospect of all time that I've drafted. No, that I've done scouting on. And so I was really invested on him. I really thought he would be the best player. This doesn't mean I don't like Klibari. I support Klibari, of course. I've said multiple times that it might prove to be a better pick in the future, even if Paulo is the best player and has looked like the best player so far in the NBA. It might prove to be the better decision for the Rockets because we have another pick this year, and if we're bringing in James Harden, adds more on top of that. Jabari fits into a lot more different types of teams, and he's also very unique. He's not an offensive option, but he's very unique in the sense that I think he'll be able to play 1-5 defense and be a sharpshooter, which is I can't name a single more person in the league that can do that, and the flexibility that provides to you offensively and defensively when building a team. This is not a dig at Jabari. I'm just saying in the moment, right?
I get it. Yeah.
And I'm it says worst moment. And I was like, when did I feel the worst throughout the entire year?
Yeah, that makes sense for you, 100%, dude.
Yeah, and so that moment where I couldn't even be bothered to run the space, I just told I think Brad was with me. I told Brad, you run the space. I cut off my mic and I was just like, okay, I'm not gonna speak because I don't want to say anything that I might regret in the future.
Yeah, the
So
the meme of I'm not going to speak, I'm just going to get in trouble.
yeah, that's a Portuguese meme as well, so
Yeah.
it seems fitting.
All right, most improved player.
Oh, to me this one was easy. It's Jalen Green.
Yeah.
He looked fairly terrible, both on defense and on offense. A lot of it due to schemes. I thought back then.
The double big lineup killed him.
Yeah, double big lineup killed him, and then from the beginning of the year when he was still struggling to what he did across that the slow, well, maybe not slow, but the improvement that he's shown defensively, offensively, playmaking across the board throughout the year, continuing into. I mean, right now we're still seeing him improve. I think over the last month he's been a lot better at getting to the free throw line. Big improvement point for him. So he's just been, he's gone from a guy that people were calling a bust at the beginning of the year to a guy that I believe 100% will be, like at worst a top 3 shooting guard in the league at some point.
Yeah, that's the obvious answer. It's easy. I'll throw out one that's nowhere near on the same scale, but if I'm not able to pick Jalen, I'll go with Usman Garuba just because his rookie season, so much of it was lost due to injury, but when he did play, he wasn't really in shape, looked somewhat lost and a bit tentative. This year, he's come a long way. He's transformed his body. We saw that during Eurobasket in September when he led Spain basically as an underdog to that title. Well, led might be a little strong, but he played a key role for that team. And now he's come on as a rotation player. He's capable defensively. He still needs to get better with his hands, but he looks like a guy who can be a rotation player for a winning team. He has winning qualities. And so when you compare that to where he started the year, and a lot of people wondered where he fit in long term, we talked during the offseason about this being a key year because that could be the kind of guy that you perhaps replace with your cap space over the summer if it looks like he's not going to pan out. Well, now to me, it looks pretty clear that Usman Garuba is going to be a rotation player, assuming health in the NBA. He's come a long way this year. The flip side, and of course, we're transitioning now to most disappointing player of 2022. This is our last of 2022 before we wrap up with a couple of 2023 look-aheads. The guy picked right after Usman Garuba, Josh Christopher. A year ago, it's easy to forget, but he came on really, really strong. He actually made all of his shots in that Brooklyn game in December 2021, which was the 7th win of their 7-game winning streak against James Harden, then with the Nets. Christopher was dynamic. He looked really just like a perfect Drew Holiday in waiting. That's what Rafael Stone used as his archetype when the Rockets drafted him in 2021, saying, we want you to be our Drew Holiday. This is who we believe you can be over time. And for one reason or another, 2022, it just hasn't happened for him. And I think we saw in Summer League, some of it was trying to do way too much. Instead of being 3-and-D might be a bit strong because slashing and probing the paint is a big part of his game as well. but he just tried to do way, way too much in terms of shot creating and things that go way out of his wheelhouse to where it's tough to fit him with the current group. And that's a big part of why he hasn't been in the rotation for most of the season and why the Rockets sent him to Rio Grande Valley for a long stretch earlier this month. It's frustrating because, again, a year ago, he looked like someone that at pick 24 in the first round was really hitting. It's too soon to call him a bust. Again, it's just midway through the second season. But when you compare how good he looked early on as a rookie to now someone who still doesn't seem to have figured out his ideal role and knowing when to facilitate, when to defer to his teammates, to still be struggling with that and not earn the confidence of the coaching staff or the front office, to me, that's disappointing relative to where he was entering this calendar year. Paolo, what's your choice?
It was between Josh Christopher, Daishen Nix, and the guy I picked. But I ended up going with Kevin Porter Jr. because of expectation versus reality, right? I don't think KPJ's been worse than the other two guys, not even close. But I was irrationally high on KPJ. I thought he had everything. I thought he had the tools to play to be a good defender. I thought he had good passing instincts, not coming off of the beginning of the year, but coming off of the season before and the little stretch he had. I believe he had, all the tools to be a 3-level scorer as well. I thought he had literally everything. And I had him as my MIP to begin the season last year. And the truth is, he underperformed. And, he's had 2 good games now, and he had a good stretch to close out the season. But consistency has still been awful. He hasn't been able to put together efficiency at all 3 levels. He's either he's had stretches where he's knocked down from 3. He's had stretches where he has good finishing but can't shoot to save his life. He's had games where he's playmaking really well but can't score. He's had games where he's defending really well but can't do anything else. And he shows flashes all across the board, but he has not been able to put it together. And I mean, perhaps until the last 2 games, but it's way too small of a sample size. So I'm going with him because I thought he'd be, a core building block for the future. I thought he could be a star. And right now I'm more leaning into more of that archetype of point guard that I mentioned earlier, or a 6-man, or perhaps even a plus playmaking 3-and-D wing of some sort. So I had really high expectations, which is why he's the most disappointing, because this disappointment may includes what you expected someone to be.
Yeah.
Christopher, I would agree with you. He was my favorite player at some point because of his personality and because of and I thought that his tunnel vision was due to the system he played with in college, where it was literally you get the ball, they had a ball hawking point guard, and whenever they got the ball, they were forced to go and try and do something. But that has transitioned into the NBA, and I think his first stint playing for the Rockets, he was okay, but then Dennis Schroeder came in and unfairly took away his minutes. South unfairly took away his minutes, and ever since he's never gotten back to that mentality, and tunnel vision has been a real issue. And he's not trying to be Drew Holiday; he's trying to be, I don't know, some sort of early in his career Karis LeVert, or maybe a I don't know. Just hasn't been. He's been just your typical tunnel vision shooting guard that can only score, and those are.
Yeah.
In today's NBA, just not valuable.
Yeah, I get it. Daishen Nix is a good one to throw out there as well. Certainly not anything against Daishen in particular because he was undrafted for a reason, so it's not like a big miss. But the leaks during the summer there was one from Jonathan Fagan in the Chronicle that they viewed Nix as a lottery level talent and then making him your backup point guard without really an alternative unless you count TyTy Washington. And TyTy has played well the last couple of games, so maybe there is something to that. But I would just say that going forward, while now we're focused more on the macro than the micro, it's more important to get the big things right, like Jalen and Jabari. When we're talking a couple of years from now and the Rockets are actually trying to put a playoff team and eventually a contender together, it's going to be the moves on the margins that decide, what level of team you actually are when it comes to filling out your roster around the stars that you hopefully get through the draft and or free agency. And so for a guy like Nix, I never saw it. And it concerns me a little bit that they were so high on him. It makes me, again, not like crazy worried, but it just raises my eyebrow a little bit that they missed on the talent identification there. Because, yeah, a couple of years from now, there's going to be little roles like that need to be filled, and they don't need to make mistakes of that magnitude. It's not a big deal now. It's rebuilding, but it's just something that just sort of sticks in the back of my mind, because every time I watch him, I'm like, how in the world would anyone see a lottery talent there? Again, it's not even so much that he's not trying, although there are effort issues with Tayshiun. We talked about that before. I just don't see the high level talent, period. So for me, that's something that, again, it's not a huge deal. We're just talking about a role player, and every GM has a few misses. That's just the nature of the job. But it's just something that, if this were a couple of years from now, we'd be much more concerned about that and talking about how in the world were the Rockets this high on him.
You know who he reminds me of? He reminds me of Mason Jones. In the sense of, if you go back and remember how Mason Jones played when he was like his big games were games where he was shooting crazy hot from three.
Right.
He was
that
the same
Spurs
type
game right after they traded Harden.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was that type of point guard that struggles to get downhill, is really stiff, right? There's not a lot of wiggle there. And he's just going to try and barrel his way to the rim and try to get a foul call. The problem with Tayshiun Nix is the fact that, well, after getting the foul call, he's a terrible free throw shooter. And he hasn't even been aggressive enough getting downhill. One of the biggest upgrades that we've seen with Ty the last couple of games is the fact that even though Ty is not the best finisher at the rim and he won't try to drive through contact, he has the floater game. And so he collapses defenses that way. He'll, even though something might not be there, he'll still create penetration and make the right read afterwards. Whereas Tayshiun Nix often wouldn't even create the penetration to begin with, and we were stuck running perimeter actions and dribble handoffs forever, and eventually passing on to a contested pull-up three or a contested catch-and-shoot three because we didn't generate any advantage.
All right, as we wrap up, let's do 2023. Just a couple. We're not going to do the negative ones because we're going to be positive. 2023 is going to be a great year for the Houston Rockets organization. Paolo, I think the best moment is obvious. I'm going to let you go first because I did the most disappointing player. I threw out Josh Christopher, so this is your turn. Best moment of 2023. Call it.
Well, I had two, one in case you were first and one in case I'm first. So I'll just throw the obvious one. The best moment of 2022, for the good or for the bad, looking forward to it, is the draft lottery night. I'm the type of dude that likes penalties in soccer. I like the high pressure, like emotional moments. So that's going to be the high pressure emotional moment. That is the high pressure emotional moment of any rebuilding team, especially when there's so much on the line. And it doesn't have to be Wemby for that to be the best moment of 2023. If it's good, I think I'll be fairly certain that will be the best moment.
So for me, and this is going to be a bit of a sentimental choice, I'm going to go with James Harden's return. If this happens, and I think there's so much smoke that, again, it's far from a done deal, but it's definitely a very realistic possibility. If it happens and you bring in James Harden to complement, hopefully, Victor Wembanyama from winning the lottery, I think that's the obvious one. If you can get the number one in a draft where there's just a transformational piece, arguably the best prospect in 20 years since LeBron, that's massive. That's the obvious choice. But even if it's not Victor, even if it's, just a very good prospect to pair with Jalen and Jabari, if you can then bring in James Harden as the leader to basically be the straw that stirs the drink and try to bring that young group together and utilize his gifts as a passer, as a playmaker, it would be an incredible storyline. And I just think about what Toyota Center would feel like in October 2023 when James Harden, the second best player in franchise history, comes home. We've already seen the feelings starting to thaw the last few months, I would say. The first game that Harden came back in March of 2021, of course, at that time, crowds were still small because of COVID, but it was primarily booze. People's feelings were very raw. And when Tillman Fertitta announced that they were going to retire James's number to the rafters, at the time, people really reacted negatively to that because everything was still raw. Then in December 2021, it was more 50-50. There were still those booing, but by and large, there was much more perspective. People seemed to appreciate what he had given over 8+ seasons with the Rockets. Then in December of this year, 2022, when Harden came back with the Sixers, it was really like 80-20 or 90-10 in terms of the level of support for James. Of course, the fans still wanted the Rockets to win the game. They were cheering against him when the game was on the line. Everybody loved when KPJ blocked James at the end of regulation to help send that to overtime. but people really respected what he did in Houston. There was much more of an appreciation. Time heals all wounds, as they say. And so I think the few remaining holdouts in terms of embracing James Harden and looking at, the total body of evidence and not just what happened at the very end. I know there's some that fixate on also he didn't win a title, but come on. I mean, he was a hamstring away. That's not his fault. He gave the Rockets everything he had for 8+ seasons, second greatest player in franchise history to Hakeem. For him to voluntarily come back 2 years later and be a part of the franchise's rebirth in a season where they're clearly trying to win through the draft pick obligations. They have all these fascinating young talents in Jalen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., and hopefully Wemby, but really any pick you get high in 2023 should be very intriguing and a key part of your future. To have James Harden coming back and leading that group, just imagine the feelings that will be in Toyota Center that first home game, how optimistic it will be, because it'll be basically like past meets the future. You'll have a key part of your past and the franchise's history back with you, basically as your front man. And then you'll have these guys that you're trying to develop into the next generation. It'll basically be the perfect marriage of last decade and what we hope is going to be a great decade of the 2020s. So for me, that is my best moment. Not saying it's for sure going to happen, but to me, there's enough smoke there that it's pretty, I don't want to say likely, but pretty viable. Let's put it that way.
It's your best moment. Since you're saying that, is your best moment the first day of free agency, or is your best moment the first home game?
Oh, the first game. First game.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think that's one of those things, the vibes in that arena, the first game when they call out his name at the end of, lineup intros. Yes, I'm assuming that James Harden would go last because come on. That would be absolute goosebumps. Sure, free agency would be fine, but that's just a Twitter moment. I think actually seeing everybody together, and even if you're not there, just watching it on TV, the environment of seeing people together physically in real time, process and react to James Harden introduced with the rest of this young group that's going to be ready for their leap up the standings. Yeah, that's my best moment. So most improved for 2023, and this is our last one because, again, we want to be positive. Everything is going to go great. I feel like the obvious ones are Jabari and Tari going into year 2, and we've seen them put it together for stretches, and now each of them, there's a case where in 2023 they put it all together and find the consistency. You have the peaks much more frequently, but I'm actually going to go with Jalen Green. I think he's going to do it a second straight year because he's the type of player we've seen. The highlights this season are so high, and there's still some really low points to where people ask that aren't watching the games, oh, is he just a chucker? Is he just putting up these raw numbers because he's inefficient? And of course, some of it, a lot of it, quite frankly, is situational. He doesn't have the right teammates. He doesn't have the ideal coaching. It's tough for him to be at his best every single game. I think going into year 3, when he gets another offseason in the gym and an offseason in which Rafael Stone is actually trying to put a winner around him, perhaps with James Harden making the game easier, I think the leap in efficiency from year 2 to year 3 by Jalen Green, what we see starting in October, is going to be phenomenal. So for me, I know Jabari and Tari are the easy ones. I'm going to go with Jalen simply because I think once you surround him with a veteran supporting cast, and we'll see what they do with the coaching staff as well, I think there's going to be an otherworldly version of Jalen Green that gets unlocked starting next season.
That's a good shout. I actually think so. My pick is Jabari, just because he's a really high pick. He has all the talent. He has the most room to improve, I would say, and I believe he'll do it. His archetype is not like the hardest to develop. If he develops, as a shot creator, but beyond just those mid-range turnaround jump shots, even more margin of progression there will be. But I think there's other people who deserve a shout. I think KPJ deserves a shout. He'll most likely be here, and his ceiling is still really high. And there's a world where they don't manage to get a better point guard, and he's still starting, and he makes a leap. I think there's a shout for Tari Eason, although I'm higher Tari Eason than most people, so I think there's less of a margin of progression. I think his 2 main developments, as I said, are mostly related to decision making, and so to me, that will have a big impact on the difference of what he provides on the court. But in terms of talent and his personal development, it's not that that hard to achieve. So I'm not going to go with him. I think that there will also be a good shout, especially if it's Wemby or Scoot, that the most improved player will actually come from the draft. I know they'll have limited time to develop, but most guys struggle to begin their NBA careers. But I think those guys are so talented that a month into their NBA careers, they'll look really good. Especially Wemby. He might take a little bit of time to acclimate himself, but from I don't know, October, November, December, he might literally just look like an all-star. I wouldn't be surprised if he does, if we're using him correctly, of course. And so they also deserve a shout, but I'm not gonna be hot takey. I'm just gonna go with the easy answer and go Jabari Smith Jr.
Fair enough. All right, well, that's an optimistic note that we can leave off on. We've been much longer than usual in this episode. We're always long-winded, but I think today trying to weave in both what the team is doing on the court this week, the road trip, Chicago, Boston, Dallas, and also looking ahead to 2023. There's a lot to discuss as we both look at the micro and the macro of Houston Rockets basketball at the end of 2022 and going into 2023. With that, we will finally wrap up. For Paolo, I'm Ben. If you want more from us before our next episode, Twitter is the best place to get it. I'm on there at Ben Dubose. Paolo is on there at Paolo Alves NBA. You should also follow the Logger Line, which is the Twitter handle for this show. That's where we put out all of our episodes, and you can also find a link to our link tree, which is where you can access basically where we are on every platform, Apple, Google, Spotify, wherever you want to listen to us. You should be able to find that through our distributors, which are in our link tree. And of course, you can also find information about our sponsors and partners there, Carbach Brewing, Sports Talk 790, Rockets Wire. You can learn more about them through our link tree and access their great content as well. With that, we will bring this to a close. For Paolo, I'm Ben. Thanks as always for listening, and please come back soon for another new episode of The Logger Line.